What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and we're going to be going over the Steelers at Browns game on Thursday Night Football this week. The game is a 36.5-point total, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are minus 3.5 on the spread right now. I think that's actually a lot closer than I expected. Maybe because we're in Cleveland, that's why, or maybe because it's a rivalry game at this point in the year.
I mean, they always play each other close, and on top of that, it's a slugfest between both teams. On top of that, there's potential weather involved,
Right.
With some sleet, snow potential, because of essentially the whole country is going through a cold front this week. So a lot of cold weather. This one looks like the worst of potential rain and stuff like that. So that's definitely going to drive things down, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about props, because everything looks like a trap because of how low it is, and that's the reason behind it.
Right, for sure. But let's get into the slate. Let me throw it on the board now. One thing, the prices kind of stick out in different ways. Of course, you have up top, we don't have necessarily these like super expensive guys. You only have two guys over 10,000, being George Pickens and Russell Wilson. But if you look across the board, I have only Pittsburgh up. I'm sorry. Maybe wait. Do I have just? No, I don't just have Pittsburgh up. Justin Fields is $9,800.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that until I saw.
I didn't put him in the player pool just because we need him to be ruled out. Usually, you don't see that happen unless there's potential of a quarterback change.
Right.
I don't think Russell's done anything to warrant that, nor have any injury concerns. So, don't know why it's like that, but we're not going to talk about him until he's ruled as a starter.
Yeah, absolutely. That caught me off guard completely.
And for some reason, if he's ruled the starter before kickoff, and that's crazy to us, but he's the same price. All rules apply. If we are playing Russell Wilson in all of our lines, we're going to do the same thing to Justin Fields in probably most scenarios.
Right, for sure. Especially, I actually think maybe even more so because of the upside with the rushing and everything like that. Talking about the pass catchers, though, you've George Pickens. There are wow. Where is everybody? Mike Williams, Van Jefferson.
It's a big gap between
and Calvin.
The receiving option one versus
the
next
look at
one.
That.
Obviously Najee and Jalen Warren in between that, but really George Pickens is the lone one-man show in terms of consistency, and he's actually thrived even more so since Russell Wilson has come and become the starter.
Right.
Last week, 12 targets, I believe, was the season high, 8 for 89. Was really rooting for that 100-yard bonus, but they were just kind of playing from ahead and trying to grind out clock and stuff like that. But yeah, he's the one clear pass catcher. 11,000 seems pricey, but everything is pretty modestly priced on this slate, so it's hard to rule somebody out when they have this kind of upside and floor as well. But yeah, he definitely sticks out as one of the only Pittsburgh skill players.
Yeah, I was talking about, looking at all these other guys. The next best guy is 3,600 in Pat Fryman. That's actually a pretty solid discount, honestly, at the time of recording. I did want to say, though, and I looked at this yesterday, that the snap counts for Pittsburgh at tight end were very interesting. Let me go grab it real quick. I believe they were equal this last week between Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, both playing 58% of the snaps. Connor Hayward had 26%, but I thought it was interesting to see that both of those other two guys were on the field as much as they were. As you can see, targets are not there for Pat Freiermuth right now. So,
he's essentially getting the Kyle Pitts treatment of last year with Arthur Smith, the former coach for the Falcons, and how frustrating it was to do all that stuff. Well, Pat Freiermuth gets extended right before the season starts, and then we're like, okay, well, he's going to be the clear number 2, and they just don't want to throw him the ball. So, it is what it is. It's really frustrating for fantasy purposes because I actually like him as a tight end. But yeah, it's really hard to trust him. Price very discounted for good reason. He has touchdown upside on certain games, obviously 3 on the year so far. But yeah, the floor is very low.
Right.
And he's more of a last man in than he is a solid core play.
Well, I was looking at these salaries. I mean, he's been over 6,000 in every game up to this point. Now he's 3,600, just like plummeting. So I guess that tells us a lot about how DraftKings is finally giving up, basically, kind of like how we were thinking about giving up on Mark Andrews early in the year and stuff like that, because it's just they aren't producing. So the other guy, though, at the same position, Darnell Washington, he has had actually more or the same amount of targets because, like you said, Arthur Smith's offense. Very Jonnu Smith-esque over Kyle Pitts. Jonnu Smith has looked great, though. So I don't know if we can have that same conversation here. But Darnell Washington does have upside of getting 4 targets at 2,400. I think that's a really solid value. He's been priced really low, though. He's kind of fits his value, basically.
Right. Yeah. And to me, this is straight up a raw points. Can you grab the 6 highest? Because I think you mathematically can fit the 6 highest, whoever that may be. Do you need to go this low? I'm not sure. I guess we'll be playing around with some builds later. But yeah, a couple of the guys that stood out, the cheap guys, you definitely nailed the head on, and him being as high of a snap count as he is and getting basically the same workload, just less touchdown upside. But again, when it's a cheaper price, it's not as risky for sure. That reward.
Exactly. And then talking about the other receivers, there's 3 of them up here. You see Calvin Austin the third. Let me grab the snap counts for these guys also, because I think that's important to see what we kind of got. Last week, Van Jefferson had 55% of the snaps. Calvin Austin the third had 33% of the snaps, and Mike Williams had 32%. And then also someone that we didn't have on here, but Ben Skoranek had 26%. So everybody's getting snaps. No one is comfortable in their role, basically, at this point.
Van Jefferson has been a cardio king over the last, several weeks, or basically the whole season. He actually had a season low of snap percentage outside of week 3. I believe he did get injured and leave the game. Calvin Austin has been a slot receiver, but they don't run a lot of 3 receiver sets, so he's always hovering around 30 to 50% depending on the day. And then Mike Williams, obviously his second game with the team, big uptick in snaps, but he didn't have a target.
Right.
And that was coming off a game where he had the game-winning or go-ahead touchdown against the Commanders. So workload's not really there. Snaps are increasing. Tournament play-esque kind of thing. It's just hard to trust any of these guys, really. And actually, Ben Skoranek, what is his price? Because he actually, that wasn't sticking out the top of my head. Minimum price.
$200, yeah.
So, dart throw. If you think that there was something to do with his snap count increasing, or if that was just a one-off, he basically was inactive for the majority of the year outside of week 1 and 2, where he had less than 10%. So I don't know if it's an outlier, or if it's a trend towards him becoming more involved. But if you need to go this cheap, $200.
Right, he's basically a third tight end blocking guy more so than anything. I will say that the Calvin Austin numbers look the best. Just by pulling it up, you kind of see he's actually had targets for 5, 4, 4, 6. So he might be my favorite of the cheap wide receiver options.
And he's also their return man. So if you wanted some stacking with potential defense and having that double bump on
that's
any
fun.
kind of touchdown, that'd be fun. That's exactly what happened in week 8 versus the Giants, where he had the game sealing return touchdown as well as his touchdown through the air.
Yep. And then looking at the running back position, there's 2 guys. That's it for Pittsburgh. We'll get off and go to flex because see the real prices. Najee has been the guy for multiple weeks now. In the games where they're ahead and winning, which is I think what we're gonna find on this slate is how we feel about it. He's been great. The Raiders, they win by 19, 106 yards. Jets, they win by 22, 102 yards. And then the Giants game was a little weird, but 112 yards, 8-point game they win by. And he's been great through those games. Been the number one.
Essentially, he's as safe as you can get really on this entire slate. Look at the opportunity to share, 23 opportunities, 21, 23, 22, I believe 16 in a blowout game. But yeah, basically double digits, 7 in the last 8 weeks, basically all 8 if you want to round up on that 9.7. He's just been very consistent. His touchdowns actually have not been there, but he's just getting all the volume. 9,200 is pretty modestly priced. It's not a great matchup, but again, this is going to be an ugly slate where it's not going to be a high shootout money spot that we've seen in recent weeks. So definitely very strong core play if you want to consider lineup builds.
Yeah, and during those weeks, he's basically 50% for most games this year on snap counts, with Jaylen Warren being around 40 to 40-ish% overall. So he is getting the bulk of the run Jaylen Warren, though, on the other hand, we were expecting him. A lot of people expected him to have the bigger year than Najee had. Thought that he would take off. He's basically just a 1B to Najee at this point, getting less of the snap counts, less of the touches, but he is a solid option if you think that he will score the touchdowns. But guess what? He has 0 of those this year rushing and receiving. So yeah, 0 touchdowns on the year.
I mean, that was one of the stands we took on in best ball season, where it was Najee and Jaylen were in the same exact round and ADP range, and we decided just front it all on Najee, and that ended up being the correct call so far. But there's been a lot of positive game environments for Najee compared to Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren still had the consistent, 3 targets a game, essentially for the last 5, at least 3 targets. Again, he just hasn't scored. He hasn't had the breakaway run. They all can come on showdown slates like this. So I think because of the lack of boom, but people won't really flock to him as much as they should, because he's really the only guy in that standalone range, especially for Pittsburgh.
Right.
Obviously, we saw George Pickens, Najee, and then big dip all the way to Pat Freiermuth. So he's in the pool for sure if you think double running back is not out of the question in a game like this.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you, if you would want to play some double running back.
You look at last week where Washington and Philly, which I botched that showdown horribly with how I thought that game would go. And the first stand I took was we're fading both running backs, and both running backs were optimal.
Yeah, so, for Washington.
Eckler came out of nowhere for his 8 for 89 through the air, and then Brian Robinson punches a touchdown in and has his typical 14. So yeah, that was a horrible call. But this is a more, game script that I could see to where both of them become viable.
Right.
It's not like this time both of them are 8,000. One's 9 and one's 6. It's really easy to fit both in if you can and if you want to go that route.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, you should have played all the running backs on the last slate. We might do that today because it is going to be a cold weather game. So we'll talk about that. But let me jump over to the other side of the game in Cleveland. We've got lots of pass catchers for Cleveland. Jerry Jeudy, Njoku, Cedric Tillman, Elijah Moore. Look at all those prices. They're all basically the same price across the board, which is kind of makes this actually a lot more difficult, in my opinion, because someone will probably have a good game. We just don't know necessarily who. We do have some stands, obviously, but how closely their prices are makes it a little bit more tough to find who you want to get to.
Yeah, with Jameis coming in, they're just letting the gun sling and letting him go through the roof. And so Cedric Tillman, the first 3 games, he was the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you look at his first 3 with him, and which games I'm talking about, I don't even have to say the week because it starts with the 18 and then it goes to 29, then it goes to 19. Obviously had a dud last week, but still had 8 targets. So, and he was on the field for, I believe, 90% of the snaps. So that's not that dud game. You can't really speak out. Now, Jerry Jeudy was the one with this breakout game this past week. He had an 89-yard touchdown, went over 150 yards. Incredible, or 142 rather, but on 11 targets back-to-back weeks, he's had 11 very strong performances in recent weeks. He's finally starting to show why he was a former first-round pick. It's taken him a while to get there, but strong games. And then Elijah Moore, their wide receiver 3, who's been kind of a frustrating play throughout his career.
Right.
3 straight games, at least 8 targets. So everybody's getting peppered. That doesn't even mention David Njoku.
Yeah, we'll get to him.
His, top 6 tight end upside.
He actually catches all his targets, unlike everybody else.
Yeah, he's had 7 targets in 5 straight, which you love as a tight end. He's had 17 in 3 of the last 4. They're all in play.
Yeah.
But the frustrating thing is not only trying to decipher between the 4, the weather, bad weather,
exactly.
And on top of that, going against a really strong defense, is this going to become more so something along the lines of that Chargers game where, I think 3 of them were duds outside of Cedric Tillman, who caught a touchdown at the very, very end when they were down 24 to salvage his day. It's pretty tough. I think getting 1 to maybe 2 is probably the way I'd like to go. But we'll just kind of see if that structure allows us to do so.
All right. Well, of course, Jameis Winston, we'll pull him up real quick. He's been throwing 46 and 41 attempts. That just all that volume. If you want to play Jameis, if you want to play the Cleveland side of this game, you think that they're going to get blown out almost, and you have to get scoring, they're going to have to throw it. Jameis is a guy you probably should get to. He has the upside of 27, 29 points. It is going to be a cold weather game, but I don't see them coming back off of him throwing 40 times.
The tough thing is I see this game going more so closer to that Charger script where he really struggles and maybe multiple turnovers and all that stuff. But even if he had 13, 14, 15 points, I still think that will put you in a good spot because of how low everything is going to be.
Exactly.
So, like I said, I think it's a raw points day where you just try to get the top 6. So he is in play, even if I do think he will have a rougher game. Like Russell Wilson could be a 150 yard 0 touchdown day, and that'll be way worse than a 250 yard 1 touchdown 3 interception day. That's just kind of how this game works, and so that's kind of how we got to build around.
Yep. And then let's go check out the running back position. There's only 2 guys on this team. Also, we're going to go with Nick Chubb. And where in the world? There he is, Jerome Ford. He's a little cheap, which is pretty cool. But Nick Chubb currently getting the rushing upside. I did want to actually read off the wide receivers real quick. 85% to Jerry Jeudy, 73% to Elijah Moore, 96% to Cedric Tillman, and then Jamari Thrash has played a little bit. Kadarius Toney played 8%, but I don't think that's going to go up at all. But then for the running backs, this last week, Jerome Ford was at 56%, while Nick Chubb was at 30%. Nick Chubb, though, on his plays is getting the ball. That's the thing. When he is in, he's touching the ball. So you can kind of take that run with that however you want to. The only week that Nick Chubb went over 50%, though, was the week that Jerome Ford did miss. Every other week has been in the 30s.
So. Yeah, and it was just a tough week for my calls, but one of my props of the week was a Nick Chubb anytime touchdown. It was a great matchup against the Saints, who had allowed 10 in the last 5 games and multiple touchdowns to 4 running backs in that span. And even in a great matchup, they just still didn't want to really give him the ball enough. He actually had a dip in production and snap count, as opposed to their previous 2 weeks. It was a season low of 30% of snaps, and I know they were trailing, but still, that was a great game to get his legs under him. But Jerome Ford, who had been battling an injury, and they had a bye, he came back right before and played 46%, but it increased up to 56%, and yet their prices are even wider than I thought they would be. Obviously, there's a 4,600 price gap between the two. Really, Nick Chubb at this point is touchdown or bust, and he's not scoring touchdowns yet, other than the first game where he had 2 yards a carry, basically less than 3 yards a touch. And so it's tough and frustrating to play him. 9,000 is a steep price to cross your fingers and hope this is a multi-touchdown game.
Right.
So if I'm going to side between one of the two, I'd rather save some money and try to get one of these safer pass catchers.
Yep. Look at Jerome Ford having 4 targets, 3 targets, 3 targets, 7 targets. He's getting the ball through the air. And truly, no one has scored touchdowns for this team. As you can see, they had 14 points, 10 points, 16 points, 13. None of these games, their offense is not doing anything. They haven't scored over 20 points all year, at least on Jerome Ford's game log. I don't know about that game.
What is interesting is that each of the last 2 games that they've played, and Ford has led the backfield in snap share. Well, week 9, he had 36 snaps, and he had 5 opportunities.
Yeah.
And then he had 41 snaps, and then he had 9 opportunities. You don't really see that big of a gap of you're just going to be on the field to just be on the field.
Right.
Really, I know running backs aren't a priority as much anymore. We see a little bit of a resurgence this year, up top at least, but that's extremely low usage for a running back as well. And so maybe that's obviously why his price is such a dip. But again, in a bad weather game where you're going to have to be playing closer to the line of scrimmage and stuff, I just see somebody standing out more so like a Ford, especially at that price point.
Fair enough. And then let's go over and talk about some game theory. Let's hear how you see this game going and what you think of this game. I'm going to try something new. We're going to stop sharing and do it this way so they can see us.
Yeah, I got you. So I initially had the thought of a 24-10 game, and that was before the weather happened, or I noticed the weather. Essentially, Pittsburgh's coming off their best win of the season. Cleveland's coming off their worst loss of the season, tied for their worst margin, but it was against the Saints, who had been reeling, lost 7 of 8 essentially coming into that game. And they're just kind of going in different directions, and I just expect more of the same this week. That I don't see, even on a short week at home, Cleveland really giving much of a fight.
Right.
Maybe it's more of a grinded out, and it appears closer than it actually is. But I just see this as a low defensive, ugly game that hopefully we can just salvage by, making a fun line that makes us a lot of
Right.
money.
For sure. No, I completely get that. I will say, so for on mine, I had it 20-14. I think it's a little closer. I think that the idea of a rivalry game makes it a little closer. It's in Cleveland, which I don't know that their fans are necessarily, gonna make it roar in there, but just getting that opportunity to be at home and stuff like that. I did put Pittsburgh 20-14. We still can't see Cleveland scoring very many points. So 14 points for them. Pittsburgh defense and Najee is the way I think I'm going to correlate a lot of my lines. And we'll talk about them in a second. Going to be a fun game of, Cleveland's passing attack versus Pittsburgh run game, in my opinion. I think that's actually changed. I had Jameis at 50% and Russ at 53%. Give me a second to grab RotoWire because I believe, yes, now Jameis is at 49% and Russ is at 52%. I think that is very interesting, and that's kind of an interesting conversation in my opinion, because I don't expect Jameis to be 50% less optimal than Russ on most games in this situation, in my personal opinion. So I think that's interesting.
And again, I think just Roto needs to figure out their roster percentages, because I mean it's not that spread out,
right?
And there's not going to be only one player over 50% owned, even if it's an ugly contest from a fantasy perspective like this one. So I would take that with a grain of salt. I bet you both would be closer in the 60 to 65% range, maybe even higher if people want to double stack quarterbacks. I don't know if that will be the way that we go on the majority of our lines,
right.
but we'll just kind of see how we end up building and what we like.
I definitely think in cash games they're going to be closer to 60%. I'm not sure what big field tournaments will look like though. And then I was also going to say, on this slate, I'm going to leave some money on the board. Not with my first look, you'll see that, but I want to leave some money on the board in general, because I don't think that I don't have confidence that we're just going to get that situation where everybody that you pay up for is going to hit. And so I think that is a good way to get different on the slate.
Gotcha.
So, and then what's your must play for the day?
My must play for this game is going to be Pittsburgh defense special teams. I just think that with Jameis kind of having some turnover prone vibes, that Pittsburgh, this is a game where they just kind of take control of and just don't surrender a ton of points. And usually anytime that I'm predicting a team scoring 13 or less, that's a team where I really want to target their defense. 5,400 was a little surprising to me, coming off a slate where we saw Houston in the 6K range, and it's still being a viable and panning out the way it did. I see Pittsburgh in a similar way, and they're almost 1,000 cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So them, very interesting. And then also Chris Boswell, Mr. Tight End 1 overall in terms of points per game. He's referring to Pittsburgh's kicker has been incredible. Multiple 6 field goal games this year, including last week against Baltimore, averaging 13. Multiple 4 field goal games also. So he's also in play. I'm surprised he's actually cheaper than the defense as well.
Yeah. Mine would be Najee Harris. That's my must play on the slate. I think that he gets the opportunities in a cold game where they're probably going to be ahead. It just makes the most sense. I correlate him with your Pittsburgh defense pick, like I said prior. It just, I love pushing it. For your fade, I think we kind of alluded to it, but I know your fade is Nick Chubb at 9,000. Just the snap counts and things just make a lot of sense for him to fade.
Yeah, he just isn't getting the ball enough. So I don't like touchdown or bust guys at $9,000 in my line. So it's just really hard to justify it. But again, a lot of other people are thinking the same thing. So maybe his price is going to be by far the lowest of everybody else. So if he's under 30%, and this is a raw points game, and he goes for 70 yards and a score, well, he's got a good chance of being put you in a really good spot, especially if these quarterbacks end up, underwhelming and not being involved on these touchdowns.
Yeah, absolutely. My fade is going to be basically your least favorite Browns wide receiver / player between 6,400 and 8,000, I believe, because you got to pick one of them. You can't play them all. Elijah Moore is the guy that I'm going with. I also am correlating that with like Prize Picks and what they're saying. Prize Picks currently has Elijah Moore at 33.5 receiving yards, while they have everybody else at least 10 more between Njoku, Cedric Tillman, and Jerry Jeudy. So I'm gonna use Prize Picks. I'm gonna use the lines to tell me where they think it should be. So Elijah Moore will be my fade. Contrarian play.
Contrarian play, I will say Drum Ford. That's not a strong lean, but just the price was very interesting to me with the snap counts that there is, and if the weather is worse than people expect, and right now it's saying 70%, it will be in the 30s at kickoff. So if the I guess wetness is worse than expected, I expect him being way more involved because they're just not going to be able to push the ball down the field like they've been the last 3 weeks. And I don't know if that'll negatively impact Jameis enough to fade him entirely, but it's at least enough to where Jerome Ford will have an uptick in a pass game usage and hopefully some rush yards as well.
Right, for sure. My contrarian play is actually both of the backup tight ends because, as we talked about, Darnell Washington got 58% of the snaps. He's 2,400, which is very cheap. And then Jordan Akins, they always target him in the red zone. I don't know why. He got a target this last week in the red zone. Would have scored if I believe Jameis missed him, but basically would have scored. So Jordan Akins is in play because he randomly scores touchdowns, and on slates like this, that is all you need for a $1,600 tight end, especially if he's going to get a few targets. So that is definitely a fun way to go attack the slate at the bottom. Let me pull it back up, and we'll start building some lines. So
fun stuff.
I'm going to let you go first.
And then I'm not sure if you, I don't remember if you said this with your breakdown, but I know that you wrote down leave money on the board.
Yes.
So essentially, just don't be afraid to leave salary, especially on slates like these where we're not, just trying to have the highest values. We're just trying to get the raw points. So sometimes that means that we can get away with that a little bit more. And so that's what I'm kind of showing my first look. I actually think you might enjoy this one that I built.
Let's hear it.
So my captain is actually going to be your must play. Going with Najee Harris. And this is just kind of building on a game script. But we are going to play both the Pittsburgh defense and Chris Boswell.
Okay. Right there. Okay.
And then the quarterback, we're actually going to pick Jameis Winston. So that's a little weird and different. But we are going to pair him with two pass catchers.
Okay.
So we're going to go with Jerry Jeudy as one, and then Cedric Tillman as the other.
All right, and then you leave that $1,200 that we just talked about on the board. I think that's interesting for sure. Raw point wise, I think this is a much more correlated line. Obviously, you have the running back with the defense, the kicker, because you don't expect obviously a bunch of points being scored by the receivers and stuff like that. So we're expecting some kicking, and then going with the correlation for Cleveland between Jameis and his pass catchers makes a lot of sense too. I'm going to do it a little different. Not necessarily, actually, a lot of the players are the same. Just the thought process, I guess, is going to be a little different. I'm going to take out Jeudy and Boswell. And so I have 7,100 for two players, and I'm going to get George Pickens for the raw points upside. That's the only difference, I guess, is the raw points for George Pickens that I think we could get, because if he does get his normal target share, which I believe is like 8-ish targets a game. Yeah, 8-ish targets a game. He will be probably a very viable option. And then I'm going to grab at 3,200. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to get Calvin Austin.
Okay.
Which I think is it's either Calvin Austin or Darnell Washington. I went Calvin Austin on this one just because of a consistency with target share. So I basically feel like I have the top two. I mean, I do have the top two targets for Russ. And it's a little different way of building it and thinking about it than going with the other pass catcher for Jameis and the kicker.
Yeah, that is fun. And then I even think, even though it does give you zero remainder, if you instead preferred like a Mike Williams over Calvin Austin,
right?
Because of the lack of production that he's had one catch in 2 games, and obviously didn't do anything this past game. I think it'll, even on a zero lineup, on a showdown, it will be unique enough to where it won't be heavily duped. So
Right,
I
fair.
like it in that regard as well. But yeah, that's a good first look.
All right, well, let's build one more line, and then we'll get out of here. Where would you like to start? I mean,
I want to start
other than Najee, basically,
with the mid-price captain. So
Ooh.
I want to see my must-play being Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Seeing what we can do and being able to afford both Najee and Pickens up top, and seeing what else we can get with that.
Well, I'd like to do, if we're going to do that, I'd like to go kicker also, probably.
Okay.
Because I think they work together. Pickens and Najee. Which of the receivers? Well, I think what would 9,600? 7,000. Cedric Tillman.
Oh, it does.
No, yeah, it works perfectly.
I missed math, but yeah.
So there you go. That one generically kind of worked out.
Yeah, that would be a pretty solid cash one.
Yeah, I would say it's more cash build.
Yeah, 100 remainder, but I think Pittsburgh's defense might actually be one of the 3 or 4 highest owned defenses. Highest owned captain options. But yeah, that's a pretty solid build. 4-2 look if you wanted to go that route. But yeah, I think that's pretty solid.
Well, that was so quick. Let's do another one because I don't. Let's do a build where we think that Cleveland can throw the ball because I think that's not off the table. Which receiver would you like to go with? Which is your favorite
as
receiver?
A captain?
Yeah. I mean, you get the money saving. I don't know why Tillman is so much cheaper by
or second cheapest.
Well, yeah.
Well, let's put him in there just because. And I know on my first look, I ended up going Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman. I don't know if I have really a lean between like a Jeudy versus a Njoku versus a Tillman. Right. But that lineup, the premise is fit 2 of the 3. Pick your favorite 2. And maybe at the end of the day, once I think about it, I'm like, Jeudy, he might be the highest owned because of this last game, and I want to go with the safer 2, which have been Njoku and Tillman. It's all the same. It's all going to create less dupe lines.
For sure.
So just for that record, as we build another Cleveland pass catching line. So with that being said,
that guy's
going to be in there. Let's put David Njoku on this one.
Perfect. Save us a little more money. I was going to say, I don't know what you can do. $2,000 would be what's left if you go there.
Yeah, that'd be enough for Calvin Austin again.
We're going to leave some money on the table if we don't. Let's see. What do you think? Oh, what about double running back?
Going with Jalen again?
Yeah, leaves you 69.
Okay.
And then we can go down.
For Elijah Moore. It's not fun.
Yeah. I would actually go down to and leave some money on the table.
Well, yeah, we'll throw in my must play again.
Are we going to go Pittsburgh, though, against I understand. You know, it's funny, though. They could actually have upside at this price, even here in this lineup, because of the fact that they're probably going to have interceptions and sacks and things like that. But I just wonder if the issue will be
with this specific line. It does make more sense to have Pittsburgh's kicker and not the defense. So I will concede with this build.
Yeah, if you are going to go with this build, I think that it's better to go away from. But I do like going both running backs in a line, and I think this is a way to do it. I also think you could go Najee at captain, and then I think it fits. Hold on. 78, yeah. So you can do it this way too if you wanted to. With the same players, yeah. You don't have to change anything up. And maybe if this is what you do, you might want to go with Pittsburgh's defense because now it's less going to hurt you up top, basically. Yeah. So let me
fun stuff.
Switch over to our prize picks so we can talk about our favorite props of the week. I don't remember. You had receiving yards, right?
Yes. So mine is going to be Jerome Ford's receiving yards it is now 11.5. Actually went down a yard for some reason, but essentially it's just playing off the weather and just saying that they're going to have a lot more opportunities for checkdowns and stuff like that. He had 4 targets last week, turned that into 29 yards.
Right.
Doesn't have like for the last 5 he's hit this, but it's a game environment thing for me. And 11.5, he could break that on one play.
Yeah.
So that wasn't that difficult for me to play. But for the record, all these lines are kind of discounted because of the weather.
I was actually going to say that.
Essentially, it's kind of hard to just completely just hammer a 6 pick, even though Jerry Jeudy just had 140 yards and he's 46.
Yeah.
So very, very trappy. So just kind of be careful with just playing a lot of exposure to this game. maybe a couple hit, but I mean, there's a lot of these that are just like, ooh, this is kind of a little too good to be true.
Right. I did want to actually go through them real quick because we did talk about how I am fading Elijah Moore based on receiving yards. Well, 33.5 here. Cedric Tillman at 44.5. Calvin Austin, a guy that we talked at the bottom, he's got 17.5, which is actually the same as Mr. Pat Fryermuth. So it's like this is kind of a good way to also just kind of look through, like, should I be believing in what I'm doing, or what does Vegas think? Because Vegas is really good at putting these lines together. Jerry Jeudy 46.5 and David Njoku 45.5. All of these three with Tillman are going for 10 plus yards more than the Elijah Moores. So that's why it made sense for me that way.
Before you do say yours, I will say that it's not the end all be all, but always kind of look at these if you're looking for last minute in, because a couple weeks ago on the Pittsburgh versus Giants slate, I was deciding on running back, right? And this was for prime time, but basically Singletary and Tyrone Tracy were the same price. And Tyrone Tracy's line was larger than Singletary's. And I was just like, why are people picking Singletary? And so I ended up going with Tracy. He was less than 10% owned, and Singletary was 30% owned. And I was like, what are y'all seeing? And that was, lo and behold, Tyrone Tracy goes for 100 yards and scores, and it was awesome. And I got leverage by not doing anything other than just viewing, oh, Vegas thinks that Tyrone Tracy has the better game. So I'm on a coin flip. I'm just going to ride with you. And that prop ended up deciding, and I ended up winning a lot of money because of that very fact.
Yeah, I was going to say, Vegas knows, man. They really know. That's why actually Calvin Austin's in my first look over Darnell Washington, because 11.5 versus 17.5 makes more sense. It's not, and they're $400 difference. The latter is actually more expensive. Where's Mike Williams? So we can kind of actually compare him. Yeah, he's not even on here. So that tells
you anything. And again, really it's not an exact science, but it's just another piece of research and information. If you really are having a tough time deciding between a couple, like I told you, Cleveland, all those receivers have been viable or very strong values over the last few weeks. We'll pick in 1 to even 2, maybe even 3, depending if you think Cleveland upsets and actually scores some points. Well, look at these receiving numbers, and
they're all the same.
Yeah, like look at David Njoku's is more than Cedric Tillman's. It's just 1 yard less than Jerry Jeudy's.
Yeah,
it's just kind of one of those things. And him as a tight end doing that versus all the receivers is very telling.
Yeah, the price matters here too. Like, at the end of the day, like, you can see also Jerry Jeudy's the most expensive, then Njoku, then Tillman. Maybe they based it off of these prices here, so you can kind of get some leans and stuff like that. Let's go over to receptions, because mine is a 3.5 for Jerry Jeudy. I think that you have to pick between the Cedric Tillman and the Jerry Jeudy here, basically. But I think that obviously they're getting 46 passing attempts per game. I don't think it stays that high, but I do think they have to push the ball down the field because of the fact that they're going to be probably trailing. Most likely going to be in a situation where they have to try to throw the ball around. 8 targets, I believe, for Jerry Jeudy. I'm going to just say, okay, he can catch half of them. Let's hope that, Jameis can get him the ball and we don't miss too much. I really wish there was an Njoku line on here, because he actually has the best catch rate of any of these guys. And he would have been my favorite if it was sitting at 3.5.
Yeah. And I mean, 22 targets in the last 2 games. Obviously, even if you cut that in half, just catch half of them, like you said,
right,
and it should work out. I'll be interested to see, and we'll be releasing this video on Wednesday. So essentially, as fantasy scores come out and targets come out,
right,
look at those as well, because those are ones that you don't have to have the success. You just need the opportunities there. And then fantasy score is always lesser targeted because they're coming out at the last second, so they're not as inflated or deflated based on where the market is going. So if a David Njoku's at 8 fantasy score or something like that, which is what his yardage kind of somewhat indicates, like, those are stuff that sometimes I prefer those over the receiving yards at later points in the week.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, if Njoku does pop up on here at 3.5, he will be my favorite play over Jerry Jeudy. But at the moment, I wanted to get some reception props in here. I wish the target props were up already, because they don't have them yet. But because, like you said, those opportunities are different than actually catching the ball and doing something with it. But I believe that Jerry Jeudy's the number one receiver for probably season long overall, over Cedric Tillman. So that's why I'm going with Jerry Jeudy. I think he'll probably be a higher reception targeted guy than Cedric Tillman on most weeks. So, but yeah, let me stop sharing. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us. Let us know y'all's favorite plays, anything that y'all's must plays, y'all's fades, y'all's contrarian tournament plays, because there's a lot of guys on the slate that you could be like, that's my guy this week. You could like say like, that's the guy I'm going to go with. He's going to be in all my lines, because there are so many pass catchers for the Browns. And there's also a bunch of cheap pass catchers for Pittsburgh. So yeah, put that in the comments and tell us which guys y'all really like this week.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Please join all of our socials as we keep on growing this community. All of our lines are always posted on Discord right before kickoff, usually an hour before on Thursday night slates like this. I anticipate we'd be deciding and finalizing about 2 to 3 lines.
Mm-hmm.
This one kind of feels the same because of all the pass catchers being pretty solid values, but the weather being an uncertainty. So just be on the lookout for that, and then contribute where you can, because maybe you'll point out some stands that you're taking, and we might side with you because that's worked out with us in the past, and I'm sure it will in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes also like you might be a Cleveland fan, and like what's kind of more going to happen because you watch them at a insane rate compared to us, who we are in Texas. We don't really watch Cleveland. They've been really bad. Hasn't been necessarily fun football, except for, of course, Jameis becoming the quarterback.
Right.
So maybe you have a better lean than we do, and we'd love to hear about it. So we appreciate y'all hanging out with us, and we'll see y'all on the next video.